Good evening, and welcome to Real Talk, where every Sunday night we offer insight, education, and resources to in home caregivers and those that are affected in their world. These are the children, the parents, the extended family, and everyone who loves them. Our goal is to offer real life topics and learning through discussing real issues and offering real solutions. And tonight, I am excited to welcome our guest, Emily Barrett, who is a professional nanny with extensive experience traveling and living internationally while embracing a variety of cultural experiences and opportunities. And I happen to know Emily both as a professional and as a friend, so it's a great thing for me to get to talk to her tonight. So first off, welcome, Emily. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So when Emily does her work, her focus is really on encouraging children to experience and interact with the world around them. And tonight we're going to kind of dig into one aspect of this that we've kind of been holding off talking about for a while, but things are getting a little better, hopefully, in our world. And so tonight we're going to dig into something that Emily is a hardcore experienced expert at this point, and that is traveling during a pandemic.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about this kind of in general broad terms and what that looks like. And she's going to be really sharing some great information with you tonight. Before we kind of dig into this, Emily, I would love if you could tell our audience a little bit about your journey in the nanny world and how you got into traveling and living with families nationally and internationally, because I know a lot of people are interested in this. And we're going to dig into some realities of it maybe a little bit tonight too, but share with us how you got here.
It's not the shortest story, but I'll try to make it as short as I can. So basically, I was born in New Jersey, and when I was 5, my family moved to Belgium. So I spent a lot of my childhood in Europe growing up. That was my first little travel bug I got there. And then when I was 17, I decided to go on an exchange year to Finland. After that, I decided to return back to Belgium to go to college. I went to college for early childhood education, and then decided to take my last year of college in Sweden.
Mhm.
And I went to school there, but also worked at a local school and learned the ins and outs of Scandinavian parenting, which was amazing. I graduated from the college in Belgium and decided I did not want to be a teacher, did not work in a school setting, and took off for Australia, where I was a nanny for just a little less than a year. Again, that travel bug was really there, and I knew I wanted to be in different cultures, different settings while working with children. So after my year in Australia, I decided to go to Connecticut, where I was closer to my family in New Jersey and could spend time with them, but also work as a nanny. And in Connecticut, in the area I was living in, there are a lot of nannies, and a lot of them are not, let's say, travel ready, and are not ready to travel with the families that I knew in the area. So families started asking me if I could travel with them. So their nanny would work up until the travel date, the departure date, and then I would take over, travel with the family, and then basically come back and hand over again. And I loved it. And I'm like, why would I not do this? This is everything I could have wished for. And then after a while, I realized, like, I don't even have to be home for this. I don't have to have a home base. If I have the right families around, I can travel on my own, but also meet up with these families when they need me. And then I really, really worked on the travel side of nannying until about 3 years ago. I got a job offer in California, and it would be a long-term position, which I took, but it's with a family that travels very often. So I still get that travel in.
Mm-hmm. So you've essentially, for all intents and purposes, most of your nanny career has been travel in some form or another.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So we're going to jump into our talking points here in a second, but just so our audience has an idea, and I know what the answer to this is, but share with them some of the countries that you've gotten to see while doing this.
I think a few of my favorites were South Africa. We were in the bush, so really around the animals. Nicaragua. I worked in the Netherlands. I traveled to Uruguay with a family. Just nice places like Florida, which is within the country, but still neat to see. Australia, I said, just many, many places around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is it's a fantastic opportunity. It also has some challenges, and there's ways to do this well. But we're going to talk tonight specifically about kind of traveling during a pandemic. Obviously, we are still, as a world, still dealing with COVID. But the reality is, there are things that have happened in the past, like SARS and other things like that. And there are things that could happen in the future. So this doesn't apply just to our right this moment thing. This is something that could be great knowledge to have on a long-term basis. So let's kind of jump into this. One of the things that's really important, I think, and I'm hoping you can share with us around this, is kind of the situation that all of us kind of have a different comfort level, or I call it a risk tolerance level, but nevertheless, we have to feel comfortable. We have to feel safe as an individual. So talk to us a little bit about that and what that looks like.
So it's really important to have an open discussion with the family you'll be traveling with. And I feel for travel nannies, you can have two situations. You can either be working for a new family that you don't really know and travel with them, or it can be for a current nanny family and you'll go on a trip with them. So the comfort level will be very different for both situations. Very, very important to talk about what you're comfortable with and how you'll deal with certain symptoms or complaints that could be related to COVID, or in the future, maybe something else, and see how you'll discuss it with each other. If the parents don't feel well, how will they let you know? Same for you. What's the arrangement there? But also, how will you take precautions during the trip? Will you do temperature checks? How will you practice social distancing? Is it a family reunion where everybody's flying in from all over the country and you just don't know where everyone has been? And are you going back after this trip to your grandparents who are just at risk? So you need to decide if you're willing to even go on this trip, if you're going to take this temporary job, or if you're going to go with your current family, and what the requirements are to make it safe and healthy for everyone.
And so do you have any tips around your best suggestions for what if you get sick, whether it's COVID or whether it's something else? What are your best tips around what if you get sick?
So I think right now you have to just be careful for everything because you don't want to risk exposure. So first of all, try not to get sick. That's my main tip. So be as strong and healthy as you can before taking off on this adventure. Really make sure you sleep well enough before the trip, stay hydrated, exercise enough, and then hopefully you won't get sick. Now, if you do feel unwell, immediately communicate. Just say, like, I feel like I have a fever, I need to check my temperature, I can't smell anymore. You just let them know right away and you quarantine if you can. If not, you try to find someone to look after your charges, have mom or dad take over, and just distance yourself until you can figure it out. It might be as easy as just quarantining for 24 hours and seeing your temperature dropped, or it was just migraine, just that simple, or try to find COVID testing and see if you expose the other people to it.
And is there anything that you would share in terms of, like, if you do get sick, should somebody who's doing this kind of travel, should they have like travel health insurance? Should they have some kind of an emergency evacuation insurance? What kind of things should they have around that?
So unfortunately, most of the insurances aren't easy on COVID right now. So the insurance I like to work with for travel is just not being part of this. What is good to have just as a family is a plan if anybody gets COVID, because if you're in a rural area, are you staying put there? Are you quarantining? Did you drive there? Are you driving back in one car together if one person's sick? Like, what's the idea? Is there an area nearby that has a good hospital that if it's necessary, you have a place to go? So there's a way bigger game plan to travel these days than there used to be.
Absolutely, I agree. And those were things we had to think about before, but now during this current pandemic and potentially any future one, that could be significantly impacted in terms of that. And I know for me also, the travel insurance that I would normally use actually has a COVID clause in it also. So I get that. So if people are looking at this, there are things that are important when you're traveling with a family. You need to prepare and you need to pack well, right?
Mhm.
Those are things we had to think about before and we have to think about now. Talk to us about that, about packing for a trip, because I know you pack really light.
Yes.
I don't pack as light as you do. I've been impressed. But let's talk around that a little bit.
So now you need to pack everything you possibly can because
Mhm.
in general, whenever you're at your destination, if you can avoid contact with anyone else at the shop, at the pharmacy, anywhere, that's just great. So I actually put it right. I have a little pandemic pouch. I've got them everywhere. And it's basically just pouches I have around in bags with supplies I find necessary or on the go, like spare masks, Clorox wipes, just Purell, what else? Sanitizing wipes, just everything, Band-Aids, just so you have the basics on you for on the go.
Mhm.
So and what I really like too is if you're traveling by car, if you can bring water and soap to just wash your hands afterwards, that's even better than the little Purells I bring.
Mhm.
So find that handy, but you want to pack everything to sanitize, but also food you can think of to avoid grocery runs, anything to help with minor injuries so you don't have to go to the doctor or even worse, the hospital. So like that's a whole other thing. You want to avoid injuries. So you bring corner protectors for hotels and you want to be as prepared as possible to avoid other people, which also means you need enough to keep the kids entertained and just really prepare for not seeing anyone else.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, most nannies are fairly good at that
Mhm.
for, short-term things. And,
Yes.
and a lot of times nannies are much more creative. Is there any one thing that you found in this last year that was like, hey, this was gold when I was traveling with the kids? Was there anything that was just like a real big hit for keeping them entertained besides electronics?
Right. I have a few favorites that are just useful for any travel, but there's so
Mhm.
much you can do with some paper.
Mhm.
This piece of paper, if you have scissors, great. If not, you'll find something that works as scissors. And you can do so many activities on paper. What kids also really like is little puppet shows. You can any flashlight you have, you can use, and suddenly you have an hour show they can watch that's not electronics. You can fold origami. There's so much you can do, and it's flat and it just packs anywhere,
Mhm.
and everybody has it, and there's access to it. Like it's great.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I had one friend who used to say, "Oh, I take crayons everywhere." And I'm like, "Yeah, but crayons melt depending
Right.
on where you're going." It's
Right.
the things you don't think about necessarily all the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome. I love that. Is there anything else aside from hardcore be prepared for everything? Anything else that you found different about packing now versus before?
Packing itself, not really, but the help that I used to get with the suitcases or backpacks is less now. So
Mhm.
while I'm trying to overpack these days, I'm also handling the luggage on my own now
Mhm.
because let's say you're being picked up by a driver or there is a shuttle, you still want to do everything yourself just to avoid
Mhm.
again that risk of exposure. So if it's heavy, like that's on me now. So
Mhm.
bringing it up to the hotel room, for example, if you're doing it on your own, it's going to be heavier. It's going to be, you need to really think through how you're going to pack and not do 5 different bags, like go for one big one. Just
Mhm.
really think it through.
Right. So it sounds like there needs to be a lot more practicality and a lot more just, hey,
Or
what's this
thought
going to
about
look
it.
like? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're traveling, um, some clients might be traveling commercial, some might be traveling private, some are traveling via car, some via plane, etc. I mean, I have heard from a lot of people that a lot more families that might not have traveled private before are traveling private. And by that, I'm referring to private plane most of the time. But what are things that people can do to avoid COVID exposure while getting to and from their destination while they're actually in the act of traveling? Aside from, I love that tip about bringing soap and water for hand washing.
So you really want to limit indoor space with other people. And people who maybe show up at the airport 4 hours in advance might want to rethink those steps now. You need the time you need with your family, but don't go way beforehand. To really avoid indoor exposure. If you can wait outside for something, spend outdoor time, get the wiggles outside, that would be great. So even if you're driving and you need to stop at the rest stop, like if you can bring bathroom supplies for your little ones and or diaper changes and do it outdoors rather than bringing them inside, that's just helpful and useful. Same again, like on the go, rather than stopping for food. Maybe that's a family tradition. Just bring your own food these days. And it's really important to include the kids in this process and explain to them why you're doing certain things, what the plan is. Do they really understand that? You know, if you see other kids at the airport or the train station, that like, hey, we're going to stick together, and these days we're not just going to play with each other, and just really be extra thoughtful about every step of the way.
I love that tip about including the kids and explaining it to them, because I think sometimes we're so busy with the logistics, we tend to forget that. Even a really good nanny sometimes forgets those things. So that is a great tip. And I think if we can make it fun and make a game out of it, it engages them more and makes it not feel like such drudgery. Because I know at least my kids are getting really tired of all this.
Well, and your kids are also like, they're there to understand it. But I can imagine, I mean, I didn't have it happen, but imagine you have a 5-year-old and you finally board the plane. You're like, oh, now you have to keep your mask on. And they're like, what's happening? But you're like, put your mask on over your nose, but you're not explaining the importance. And then it's too late. You don't want to explain more. But if you go before and you're like, hey, we're going on a trip and this trip's going to be so much fun, but there's some steps that we have to follow for this trip to be safe and to avoid us getting sick. One of the steps is a mask. Do you know how this, is going to work out on the plane? And you just explain it all. So when it happens, it's not a surprise. It's not unexpected. It's not a nuisance.
Yeah, I love that. And it is so important. And kids are so much smarter and so much more resilient than we sometimes give them credit for. I think they do great if we take that time to explain it.
Right.
So you're traveling. You arrived where you're at. You're in a new destination. What does a travel nanny, or what does a nanny traveling with a family, what do they need to know about being in a new destination during a pandemic?
So I think the key is that if you have time, is to do research before. So what will the destination have for you? What are the amenities? What will your lodging look like? Do you need anything in the room? Because if you need in the room, it's really best to call beforehand and have it ready in the room so nobody needs to come in once you're there. A good thing to know also is like housekeeping will come to make your beds in the morning, but do you feel that's a necessity? If not, cancel it, have them come every few days, or make sure it's timed with the time that you can leave the space. And it's really good to see what activities you have in the area that are outdoors. And I feel a lot of times for families, that's something they like to do as they're like, oh, we just arrived, like, let's see what's going on. But we need to be on top of it and know beforehand, like, what is in the area? How can we get there? Can we avoid taking public transportation? And just really be aware before you arrive and not just be too chill about it.
And what about like if a family is a little bit more into going out, where, or do you know where people would find out about what the local rules are? Because as we know, we were discussing before we jumped on here tonight, that different areas have different rules.
So the problem here is that everything can change up to the moment of departure. So you can look up the rules for, let's say, St. Bart's, and like I think they're currently still closed. The borders are closed, but these things can happen so quickly. So it might have been the opposite. It might have been open, and then in 2 weeks, when you're supposed to take off, it closes. So you really need to stay updated. CDC has guidelines about where you should or should not travel. But then if you go abroad, embassies have information. Different states, I'm sure, have it online too. And it's just really important to check that out. But not just that, also reentry requirements. So let's say I'm in California. Up until 2 or 3 weeks ago, every time you came into California again, you'd have to quarantine for 10 days. Is that something you're okay with as a nanny? And what does that mean for your personal commitments? And if you're travel nanny just as a job for short-term positions, what does that mean in between? So first of all, you have to quarantine because of the job you just took. Like, are you going to ask the family for coverage? What's the whole understanding there?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great point. And I was actually just talking to a newborn care specialist about that last week. And her statement was, well, I'm supposed to fly from where I'm going to be into California and then work for a few days in California, but I'm not going to be there for 2 weeks. And the airline sent me a thing saying I have to quarantine when I arrive in California, because she's flying into Los Angeles, and it's a Los Angeles specific thing. And so it's sometimes it can be the state, sometimes it can be the city, sometimes it's the country. What about if, and you mentioned this, reentry. So in, what was it, February, the United States instituted a policy that you have to have a negative test to re-enter the United States. And that test has to be the proper test and administered within 3 days prior to entry. So if I'm traveling with a family and we're going, say, to Mexico, because a lot of people are going to Mexico right now, how do I find out where to get a test? Any ideas?
I would say, first of all, don't trust the airlines. Do also research about like the local area. So airlines just have its standard. I believe it's just a standard saying right now, like, make sure you follow COVID guidelines. And so just, if it doesn't say anything, don't think there is nothing to follow. Just look up your location, see what the guidelines are. Then some airports are actually offering testing right now. That, I mean, just now you have to show up early at the airport to make sure you have time to do these tests if you prefer to go that route. Also be careful, because sometimes airlines only accept a certain kind of testing. So you can't just go to any walk-in clinic in the area that provides testing. So I would talk to your own doctor to see where you can go and what they recommend, see what your city offers, and then see what the airport offers.
Yeah, I know I was talking to someone who was going to be traveling with the family to Mexico specifically. And when they were coming back, the hotel actually had a service where a doctor would come directly to the room and would test them right in the room. And then they found out that the airline said, oh, that's not good enough. You actually have to go to one of our airline approved testing sites. And so they ended up having to pay double for that. So that's a great tip of researching what there is locally. And what about other medical care for people maybe who've never done this before? You and I know these kind of things, but maybe somebody who's never done this before. Say I'm brand new to this. Where do I find out if I'm traveling to St. Bart's with a family? How do I find out where the local hospital is, or where the local hospital who might have a pediatric unit is? Where do I get that kind of information?
At that point, it's really good to network. And so you can go online and just do your Google search for the basics. If you're staying on a property where you can reach out to the front desk or a property manager, it's just really good to get that information in advance and figure that out. It's also really good to have all your medical information ready beforehand. So if there are issues or concerns with yourself or with your charges, you get the information from the doctor. So if you need to communicate with, let's say, a doctor or hospital at your destination, you're set for that. And you don't have to play phone tag or work with time differences.
Absolutely. So is that like having copies of vaccine records or any kind of medical condition or allergies and
prescriptions, extra prescriptions, have explanations in English or the language of your destination with you. So if you have to show what medication you take, what for, you can just show it right there and you're all prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add one small tip to that. Medications, if you're traveling with them, need to be in the original prescription bottle,
Yes.
because some countries, medications are actually illegal in their countries. Like a lot of ADHD medication is
Mhm.
illegal in a lot of countries, unless you are, a, you have your actual prescription bottle. And sometimes you even have to have a note from the doctor on top of
Right.
that. So knowing what those regulations are wherever you go can be huge.
Yes.
Absolutely. Is there anything else, Emily? I mean, you've shared a ton of great information already. I know there's going to be a million questions that come up, but is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience as kind of a final takeaway tip for them if they're thinking about doing this or they have a trip coming up with a family?
I think that if you're ready to travel again, that you should take the opportunity and just find safe ways to do so. If you're not ready, don't have a family convince you to, because if you're scared or worried while you're on the job and when you're traveling, you won't be a good nanny. If you're constantly looking out for not like just being concerned, you can't perform the way you would usually. So just don't do it.
Mhm. I think that's a fantastic tip. And I think that applies to a lot of things in life for sure. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Emily. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to get to chat with you. And I think that you've not only shared some amazing takeaways, but I think it's going to spur a lot of questions and a lot of
Great.
interest. So I think that's going to be great. Thank you to our audience for joining us tonight. If you have any questions for Emily about traveling during a pandemic or outside of it, I think she's definitely the person to ask. So put them in the feed and tag Emily or tag Newborn Care Solutions, and we'll make sure that you get an answer. If you're wanting to watch this segment on replay or catch any of our past Real Talk episodes, along with accessing our other content, pop on over to newborncaresolutions.com and click on the education tab. You can also check out all of our content now on our YouTube channel. Just type in Newborn Care Solutions Real Talk into the search function and it'll bring it all up for you. So thank you for joining us and have a great night.